So let's talk about, how does focusing open us to the spiritual? How is it a doorway to the spiritual? I often ask Jean Genlin, why don't you name the spiritual? Because Genlin, called it the big system, or the big everything, or the greater outdoor thing outside of us, right? But he didn't actually use the word spiritual. And what he told me was, he said, he wanted to always use fresh language. And there are people for whom the word spiritual doesn't open it up this experience well. So he said, if I use the word spiritual in a workshop, he said, half the people will love it and they'll really get something from that. And the other half will think that we're going to be chanting Om for the next half hour, and they may be turned off. And so I love that about him, that he was so careful in his language. So he didn't want to use a word that had other meanings for people, perhaps. Jean said, when I use the word body, I mean much more than the physical machine. Your physically felt body is, in fact, part of a gigantic system of here and other places, now and other times, you and other people. In fact, the whole universe. The sense of being bodily alive in a vast system is the body as it's felt from the inside. Campbell and McMahon, these Catholic priests that I mentioned before, defined it this way. They said, focusing seems to bring one closer to a point of spiritual alchemy, whereby body transmutes into soul and soul into body. I'll just take a moment to take that in. Spiritual alchemy, whereby body transmutes into soul and soul into body. One other aspect of focusing, I think, really helps it become a portal. And that is that let's see how to put this. Genlin actually didn't want people to think that focusing was about being with your feelings. And sometimes he would say in workshops, to kind of wake people up, focusing is not being with your feelings. And everyone would kind of go, what? And then he would say, it's about turning to another state where we have a feeling of a whole situation. And I think that is such an important focusing question. What's the whole of it, right? And when you ask what's the whole of it, it's an intimation that there's more, and often that there's something very spiritual there. So to give you an example with a client, they come in and they're just in terrible grief about the death of their dog, and they're just, in grief. And then if you ask, what's the whole of this for you, this experience of losing your dog? What you'll often get then is something very different, right? Then there'll be the more will come, not just the sadness, which is a part of it, but the joy that we've had, that person's had with their dog, the adventures they've had, the companionship they've had. It's fuller, it's richer, and it's often more spiritual. So I think that's another, I have never seen that in any other process or practice where we're invited to be with the whole of something. And that's a human feature that Genlin named, that we have that capacity. Animals don't have that. And it's a very special capacity that I think kind of opens the doorway or the portal to the spiritual.